on an online platform makes me really nervous. I'm actually a teacher and we're teaching remotely right now, and that's like my biggest fear is like to be speaking and like nobody hears me. Like, oh my gosh, how awkward, right? So thanks. If something goes awry, I guess like tech people just message me if you're able to do so, but I'll fix the problem if something comes up. But anyways, I'd like to say thank you to Christina for asking me to speak tonight. It's always such an honor to be of service in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't take this program lightly. It saved my life. And I don't mean that, like I mean that 100%. It absolutely saved my life. And to be honest with you, coming to AA was really not on my to-do list, man. Like I did not think that I would end up here, but boy, am I grateful. It's nothing short of a miracle that I'm here. Like I'm an alcoholic, I drink, it's what I do. And the fact that I'm not drinking today is absolutely a miracle. So, um, I guess for me tonight, the topic that I would really like to bring up, I'm going to share a little bit about my story and just kind of identify myself, because I definitely belong here, that's for sure. But the topic that I wanted to bring up tonight is about, being like authentic, being honest, and being vulnerable, because that's how I've been able to grow in the rooms of AA. I have to live my life rigorously honest. And that's not just like, not just in matters pertaining to alcohol, but in every aspect of my life. Just kind of a little bit of backstory, and I always like to say this, but the knowledge that I have today on my life is like as a result of like going back and looking, right? Like at the time, like I really wasn't aware of things that were going on, but like being able to be sober and look back at these things in my life, like I have the knowledge that I do. But, you know, looking back at like my upbringing, I did not have a super traditional upbringing. I come from an alcoholic home. I come from a really damaged home. And I used to think that like I would come to AA early on, and I remember my first couple of meetings was like these old white men, right? And they'd be like, I divorced the third wife, or the third wife left me, and I lost the house and the car and the mortgage, and I just couldn't relate with that. And I learned that AA has members that are from all walks of life, and I'm here to identify with the similarities, not the differences. And so looking at like my past and my upbringing, if I could sum it up in one way, it would be that I always felt uncomfortable. I didn't like where I was. I didn't like who I was. And early on, I learned a couple of things about life. I learned that my parents were unreliable. I grew up in a very dishonest, toxic environment. And early on, I realized I really only had myself. Um, and that was a really tough place for me to be. I felt super uncomfortable until I took my first drink at 8 years old. And I still remember it. It was a Mike's Hard Lemonade. Pretty gross, but I'll never forget that, because it was like that moment where my life changed from black and white to Technicolor, really. I had a very explosive temper as a child, just lots of behavioral issues. Like I said, I come from an environment with just really dishonest parents, unreliable. And as time went on, the minute that I took that drink, I just kind of chased it, because I wanted to feel okay. And for a long time, drugs and alcohol worked for me. And it brought that ease and comfort that I always sought out. And I chased that for a long time. And at first it kind of started off with like lots of fun, right? And then I'd started like having some consequences. And then before I knew it, it was like all consequences, no fun. And, my story goes just, I look back now and it's like, I went from like homeless junkie to high school teacher, right? Like my life is just so completely different. And like I said at the beginning, and I'll say it again, like that's nothing short of a miracle. I look at my drinking and my drug use like it was just abnormal from the start. But I had no idea what it meant to be an alcoholic. I knew I had a problem. And as the years went on, things progressively got worse. Obviously my parents split. And then I think one of the things that was the most impactful for me was at about 14 years old. My mom, I was living with her at the time. essentially suffered like a mental breakdown from just years of drug use. I was really overly exposed to things as a child. Like my lifestyle as a kid was just very abnormal. And I was around things and exposed to things I really shouldn't have been. And that feeling of like no self-esteem, anger at the world, right? Like if you were me, you'd be an alcoholic too. Like that carried for a long time. I'm kind of like skipping through my story just because I don't really think it's super relevant. When I drank, I couldn't stop. And when I wasn't drinking, it was all I thought about. And today I understand that to be the mental obsession and the physical allergy, right? But I didn't know that at the time. So at about 19 years old, I walk into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, and I didn't really want to be there. But at that point, I had lost my license. I had become homeless, had a couple of arrests, just lots of things going on, lots of consequences. And it really wasn't the consequences that got me there. It was just kind of like the emotional bottom that I felt, just completely hopeless, lost, didn't have anybody. And I walked into the rooms of AA and I swore that I would never love or trust another human being. To me, like I said, with parents being unreliable and friends wanting nothing to do with me because the way that I drink and the way that I get high is I step on every meaningful relationship in my life and I burn it to the ground. And then I have no one. And that's what this disease wants for me, is it wants me to be alone and isolated. And I tried really hard to die from my drinking and drug use, and I just wouldn't die. And I just kept causing damage and feeling miserable and waking up every morning. And I think it was that bottom that brought me in. And my very first experience with AA, I got a sponsor because, I don't know, that's like what you people suggested. I remember like at the end, we would hold hands and say the Lord's Prayer, and I just really wasn't about that. I didn't want you to touch me. I didn't want you to look at me. I just felt really mistrustful of other people. And a lot of that was personal experience, just like people being unkind and the lifestyle that I was living. I learned not to trust people. But, I got a sponsor, and I started working the steps with her because that's what AA was about. Was I had to get a sponsor and work the steps. And for the first time in my life, somebody explained what it meant to be an alcoholic, at least in AA terms. And I talked about it a little bit, but for me, drinking and getting high was like all I could think about. And for me, it used to be, if there was nothing and nobody that could get between me and the bottle, and if you tried, I cut you out. And I look at my life today and it's kind of opposite. It's more so program related, right? So now today, nothing and nobody can get between me and my program. But at the time, I didn't understand what that meant to be an alcoholic. And I started to learn about the disease of alcoholism and that I couldn't stop thinking about drinking when I wasn't drinking. And for me, I tried to get sober a couple of times before coming to meetings. But to be honest with you, being sober felt like doing time, right? Like it was just a ticking clock. I almost felt like I would go to treatment and I would get sober and I'd be like this hot air balloon, right? And I would get out of treatment and I would just be like until I ran out of gas, because for me life was unmanageable. And they'd be like, identify your triggers, right? And I'd be like, my whole life is a trigger, right? I felt like everybody in life had just gotten this manual on how to live and how to act and how to hold a job and how to do all these things that I just couldn't manage to do. And I had just missed this manual. Like I just could not be a productive member of society. I didn't know what to do with myself. And so every time I got sober without the program, eventually I would reach a point where sobriety was just, I couldn't tolerate it. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. So it was this idea that I was just like morally defective. And for some reason, like I just couldn't put sobriety together. And everybody around me would be like, just stop drinking, just stop getting high. And maybe I would do that for a little bit. And if alcohol and drugs were truly the problem, I would go to detox and I would sober up and I would be fine. But when I sober up without this program, without the spiritual experience, like I get worse. And people start looking at me and they're like, geez, Sage, you need to be on medication, right? Like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so angry, right? And so working with this first sponsor, she started to explain these things to me. And at the same time too, I'd have a period of sobriety and I would the allergy would kick in. Like for me, you know, a lot of my story has to do with drugs. And so for a long time, I tried to experiment with just drinking, but anything that's mind or mood altering sets off that allergy for me. And I could go to the bar, or I could, you know, go get high for a night with every intention of it just being that one time. And I wake up a week later coming out of a blackout, like with no intention of doing any of those things that I did. I just had no control over how much or when I put something in my body. You know, it was really transforming when I worked through those steps. And I'm going to be honest with you, at first it was tough. Like it wasn't like I worked these steps and instantaneously my life got better. But my sponsor taught me all these things, like you got to pray. And if you have these resentments, you have to pray for these people and you have to be of service. And it's important to make coffee and say hi to the newcomer and all these things. And I started taking action despite how I felt, because it was explained to me that I don't just get to instantaneously feel better. I have to take the action first. And when I take that action in AA, whatever it is, even if I think it's stupid, like service work, I used to really think like, how is making coffee at a meeting going to make me feel better or help me stay sober? Now I look back at that and I laugh, because it absolutely helped. It was that service to get me outside of myself. And for the first time in my life, like I really learned to trust my sponsor and the people of AA. And that was huge for me. I mean, it was the people in the rooms that taught me how to love other human beings, like how to show up, how to be of service, how to think of somebody for the first time in my life outside of myself, because I couldn't do that before. I didn't care about you, right? I looked at people as, what can I get from you, right? Like how can you help me? And if you had nothing to offer me, there was really no point in us having a relationship. And I look at people so differently today. Like I have so much love for other human beings in the rooms, the women especially, that carried me through some of the hardest times. Now working through the steps, you know, making amends, writing a 4-step, getting honest with myself, that was what was hard. And I took those actions and I made mistakes. And as time went on, I started to feel better. And at first it was just a couple of minutes here and there and I'd be back in my head. I call my head the crazy committee, because that's what it is. It'll tell me all sorts of lies about myself. And I've come to understand that alcoholism is a disease of the mind. It's my thinking. It's my thinking that gets me in trouble. And the more the time that I spend out of my head and in front of my eyes is where I find true peace and happiness. So I work through these steps and I start feeling better. And I kind of start piecing my life together. And I used to think like, oh, I'll go to AA like when my life is back together and I'm not like fighting with the courts or like having to go to these classes or like all this stuff. But I came in with nothing. And by taking those actions slowly but surely, things get better in my life. And it wasn't always how I thought it was going to be, right? Like I didn't necessarily get what I wanted all the time, which was probably a good thing looking back. But I absolutely got what I needed. And realistically, all I ever sought out was peace of mind. Like I just wanted to feel okay. I wanted to feel okay with myself. I wanted to feel okay in like everyday life. I wanted to be able to hold a job and be a normal, productive member of society. And it was like through the steps and the principles really of like applying these things to my life and other areas. Especially for me, a big part was being honest, because growing up in a dishonest environment, of course, I was dishonest, right? And I still struggle with that as a character defect, because I learned that being honest isn't necessarily like just telling the truth, right? But it's like, I used to think that lying was just telling lies. But for me, a lot of it was withholding information and not talking about these things. And these are the things that I learned, and they sound like simple things. Like sometimes I feel like being in AA is like being in kindergarten again, right? Like be kind to others, be honest, and be selfless. Like that was shit that I should have learned as a child, right? But it was these things that I learned here that gave me tools for living. You know, I look at my life today, it's entirely different. I suffered a lot of really tough things in sobriety. I went through a lot of things that I didn't think I could walk through. And something that I've been working on recently, which I wasn't sure if I was going to share tonight, but I don't know, I'm feeling like in a good place about it. And I'm going to be honest, because that's what this program has taught me. You know, I've been dealing with an outside issue for a while. And it's been challenging, but it really forced me to look at some areas of my life that I really wasn't comfortable looking at. But I don't grow in my comfort zone today. And those are the things that like I have to talk about and work through, because the way that I see it is any of that stuff that I hold inside that I don't talk about, you know, I might drink over that. You know, recently I was was diagnosed with PTSD, and that's been a big thing for me. And I realize it's an outside issue, but the reason I bring it up, I guess, is because it was just such an important thing for me to learn about. It was really holding me back in my own program. And, the way that I live my life today, like I'm trying to be as open and honest as possible. And just, I don't know, be willing to work through that stuff, and be willing to share it with others, because as I've learned with time, my problem is not alcohol and drugs. And I can sit here and think that it is, and I know it looks a lot like it, right? Like people will be like, if your problem is just drugs and alcohol, Sage, if you sobered up, you'd be great. And that's not the reality of my disease today. Like I have to be able to understand that it's much more than that. Um, so working with this outside issue has been a big thing for me lately, and just be willing to be vulnerable and be honest and talk about these things with other people, because guess what? There's other people in the rooms that have these struggles of daily living, because my problem, like I said, is not drugs and alcohol anymore. My problem is life and living by these spiritual principles and being of service to other people. And I don't know, it seems like it's so simple to be like a productive member of society, but it definitely was a struggle for me. And I don't know. I'm trying to think like how life would be like without this program. And I'd honestly be dead, right? Like it was here that I learned how to be of service, and how to be a sponsor for sponsees, and how to show up and suit up and do what I said that I was going to do. So I don't know. This is kind of a all over the place topic, but that's been something that, I don't know, I've really been passionate about sharing lately, is just learning to really be honest in these rooms so I can get better. And I think that's really all I have to talk about tonight. I hope you guys got something out of it. Thank you again so much for having me. And it's really cool to see like people from all over the world. Holy cow, this is crazy. So thanks.